also very grateful to the Minister for his thorough engagement on these matters. He's been extremely diligent, helpful, and, as always, courteous. And let me begin by declaring a sort of semi-interest. I don't think it is technically one that the Standards Commissioner would worry about, but Mr Farage and I both appear on a television programme under the auspices of GB News at about the same time of day. I follow him, but I have no financial relationship with Mr Farage. Merely we appear on GB News at a similar time of day. And it was Mr Farage who brought to the attention of the public this issue of debanking. And it is a great problem that if your bank suddenly says to you, we are not providing you with any facilities, then where do you go? It's very hard to go to a new bank. New banks don't want people who have been debanked. And Nigel Farage, in a way, became the poster boy for this issue, highlighted an issue that was affecting people up and down the country, was affecting charities, was affecting businesses that had been to see me as a constituency MP in the past. But people running certain businesses, certain types of business, found that their banking facilities were withdrawn without any proper answer or explanation. I had a pawnbroker who came to see me who had had his banking facilities taken away, and that is a perfectly honest and reputable business, but inevitably it deals with a lot of cash, and that makes banks nervous. And when they're nervous, they need to have a proper explanation given to the customer as to why that customer is no longer getting that service. And the honourable gentleman from Gordon, in a very elegant speech, teased me for standing up for Nigel Farage as if this was not a common problem, and mentioned that Mr Farage is off in the jungle eating offal and all sorts of other tasty morsels. And yes, that has had the benefit of bringing people's attention to something that was affecting our constituents across the country. And therefore, yes, I do indeed draw on definitions, but only definitions, from the European Convention on Human Rights. This is not a sudden Damascene conversion to such a document. It is simply that those definitions are in our law, and it is useful to base any amendment to a bill before this House on law that already exists, which leads me on, as always, to thank the clerks for their mastery of ensuring that amendments are within scope, because getting this amendment into scope, as my honourable friend for Weston-super-Mare found with his excellent amendment, which I will come on to, was not particularly easy, and it's why it doesn't go as far as I would have liked. It affects consumers but not businesses. I think this is of such fundamental importance. You may think, Mr Deputy Speaker, that I'm not all that much in favour of the modern world, and that it would be nicer if we could go round with the odd groat or perhaps a sovereign to pay our way. But sadly, that age of specie has gone. You might even say the age of specie had become specious, but it is in the past. Everybody now needs modern banking facilities. Cash is not used anything like as much as it was, and every transaction that people carry out needs a piece of plastic, a bank that it comes from, a telephone, some type of technology. And if you say to somebody, you are debanked, well, it's like that bill on outlawries that we only ever have the first reading on. You are effectively made an outlaw in your own land. You are without the normal law of the land, the ability to do ordinary things. And that's why this series of amendments, 4 amendments, new clauses 1 to 4, are, I think, really very important and a protection for people. And again, to go back to Nigel Farage, the idea that you should be debanked because of legal political opinions is outrageous. And I know that the honourable member for Gordon teases me for mentioning Nigel Farage, but actually, if you are a separatist and you want to break up the nation, that's a political opinion that in other countries would be considered treason. And if you were in China and you say free Tibet and have an independent Tibet, you don't get a lot of quarter from them. So once you start saying that you can be debanked for holding Nigel Farage's views, what about being in favour of Scottish independence? Would that be a view that one bank might not like and would say that members of the SNP, a perfectly legal party, should not be banking with them? It affects every political opinion, and your political opinion may of today be fashionable, but tomorrow it may not be. And we always have to consider in legislation the protection of free speech against the interests of passing fashion, because we may be the ones, and opposition members may be the ones, who are affected by it in a slightly different or changed environment. That's why we need... Of course I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, but are we not talking about slightly different things here, and that there was nobody... Certainly there's a highly contested narrative around the circumstances the right honourable gentleman describes, but my understanding is that the gentleman in question was not so much debanked as offered a lesser account and has subsequently found somewhere where he can bank satisfactorily.
Misinformed that he was only offered any new bank account with the NatWest rather than with Coutts when it became public. Prior to that, he had not been offered any banking facilities, nor had he been able to find another bank that would take him on. So the facts of the matter are that Coutts, NatWest, debanked him because of this extraordinary internal set of communications which have become public and led to the resignation, effectively the firing of the chief executive of the NatWest. Partly for gossiping about his banking circumstances, but also for the behaviour that had led to his banking facilities being taken away for his political opinions. And that's quite clear from the information that has emerged. Of course, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend giving way. His particular amendments relate to debanking and to prompted by a particular incident. But would he not accept that there is a broader issue here, that the pursuit of environmental, social and governance goals by corporations and the pursuit of values in association with diversity, equity and inclusion objectives raise the same issue on a much broader front than banking facilities? And what would he recommend the government should do on that matter?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. It does go much further. And the Bank of England issued a document some time ago suggesting that loans should not be given to companies investing in oil and gas when we need oil and gas for the foreseeable future. And I think this politicisation of banking is quite wrong. And ESG is not actually, I think, fulfilling the fiduciary duty of investors to provide the best return to their clients. And I think that is something we should look at. Yeah, of course I'll give way.
Thank the Honourable Member. Just a tiny clarification. When he talks about banks, outlaws and dodgy cash, can I just clarify that he's talking about high street banks and not Aaron banks?
I'm talking about the banking system generally, and I'm saying that it's important that people should have banking facilities, regardless of their political views. I do think it's important that Russian oligarchs may be sanctioned. I think that is a legitimate thing for governments to do, but it requires the rule of law. I want to touch briefly on some of the other amendments to which I've attached my name. I once again agree with my honourable and learned friend, the member for Swindon South, with new clauses 24 and particularly 25, put the consumer first. That must be the essence of what we are trying to do. And to my absolute horror, I've discovered I agree with him on turning some of this into secondary legislation. Skeleton bills are a dreadful thing. But we get awful legislation coming into this House where there is no detail on it at all. It will all be decided by ministers later. And they should be deprecated, and the House of Lords is very good at pushing back on them, this House less so, but skeleton bills are a bad idea. Except there is a place for secondary legislation, and this is it. And for some utterly random reason, a government that has brought us forward extraordinary skeleton bills, some of which I could mention, and I have mentioned in this chamber on occasions, then brings forward every last detail on something that is in its essence going to need revision and updating and meeting different standards as time goes by. And I think it's a modest eccentricity to have put it on the face of the bill, and I would suggest the government in the other place look at whether, because it's on the face of the bill, that can be very easily turned into secondary instruments. The secondary instruments can be ready to come into force at the same time as the bill comes into force. You lose no delay, and it just structurally makes a better bill. Though I am very embarrassed to be speaking in favour of secondary legislation, because normally I want to see things on the face of the bill. But if we could have a promise of fewer skeleton bills in future, I would be delighted. Against this, I could not disagree more with new clauses 29 and 30. It was a real mistake. And dare I say, it's a typical socialist amendment, because it doesn't trust people. Seems to me that people are sensible. They know what they're doing. They volunteer to do it. They are free to undo it. And yes, of course it's important they should be free to undo it. But there is a cost to over-regulation. That if you make companies all the time write and say, "You sure you want to do this?" that puts up the price. The profit margin won't change for the business, but the price they charge consumers will. And if you're constantly saying, "Do you want to leave us?" then you will put the price up, because there will be an administrative and bureaucratic cost to that and a loss of business that will put up the overall cost for everybody. It is legislating for inefficiency based on the idea that consumers are stupid. Well, at North East Somerset, consumers are very clever, highly intelligent, and know what they have agreed to and what they have not agreed to. I also want to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Weston-super-Mare. His new clause 31 is genius, because it gets to the heart of an incredibly complicated and difficult matter which no other piece of legislation that we have tried has really worked with. Even the one in, one out that we had from 2010 to 2015 didn't really work. I seem to remember reading that the Crown's ownership of sturgeon was cancelled during this period because it counted as one of the one out, and it allowed some regulation to come in, no doubt costing millions as you got rid of something trivial. One in, one out wasn't really there, but this does it on a proper cost audit and looking ultimately to cover everything. And that's absolutely the right way to go. And my honourable friend's superb point that when it is any type of government expenditure, it is looked at, it's reviewed, it's referred to a committee, and when it's billions of regulation, it passes through without so much as a by your leave. So I think it's a really important amendment, and I would encourage the government to do whatever it can to implement it. And a very final thought before I conclude. On petrol stations, this is very good news. Why is it that the Tesco's in Poulton is more expensive than the local service station in Ubley? I use the local service station in Ubley because it's better value for money, but Tesco's in Poulton is more expensive than their Tesco's on the outskirts of Bristol, and that's very unfair on my constituents, and I want them to bring their price down.